scale a program, you have to scale three different aspects of the program in addition to finding the processes to automate to reach that scale.
Hi, and welcome back to Bots and Beyond. Another great episode, another fantastic guest lined up as always. Somebody who is certainly no stranger to the world of automation. I know he has some amazingly insightful views on scaling automation. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you. And I know we've obviously been speaking, for more than a year actually. Even though you're only recently acquired into the ISG family. But for everyone else's benefit, and is standard now for our Bots and Beyond guests, if you could just run through who you are, what you do, and more importantly, why you do it.
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. Dan Bannoura. I've been in the automation space for 6 years, and I actually got my start with Automation Anywhere. I was hired as the lead for professional services there, and I ran the U.S. professional services team as a director. And there was a time where there was a lot of things that everybody had to figure out. Nobody really knew what to do with this yet. What the best practices should be in terms of how to go from pilot to scale and all of that. So it was a very interesting 2 years at Automation Anywhere. And I decided at that point I needed to do something different, and it's still in the automation space. And I decided to join UiPath. It was an interesting company. They were doing things very differently. They seemed to have figured out a few of the things that a lot of the other players, besides just Automation Anywhere, were struggling with at that time. And I thought, let's see where this goes. So I joined UiPath as a director of customer success and kind of helped build the CS organization in its early days for the US. Got involved with supporting the sales teams and pre-sales and really kind of just helped our staff in the US grow our customer base, figure out what those best practices should be to go from pilot to scale. And spent 4 years at UiPath doing that in various roles there. I left there as a director of strategic advisory. So I was basically the advisor for our sales teams, for our customers, and for our product teams. And it was a unique role where I was kind of in the middle, coordinating between what customers needed, what they valued, what they would benefit from, coordinating that with the sales team to make sure that we were proposing the right types of solutions with the right resources, the right teams and partners and services and everything that came along with it, and making sure that those two married up perfectly. And also working with the product team as we started to look at big picture, big visionary type scale opportunities with these accounts and these customers. We had to make sure that the product pipeline roadmap was going in the right direction, or at least we were navigating our journey according to the product roadmap that was being built out by the product team. So in the course of all of that, there was a very heavy dependence on partners to come in and do a lot of the initial stand-up of a COE, get the automation program running, and then moving into a scale mode and starting to work with various different business units and expanding from that point. And that's where partners really have to step in and help. And I found myself being kind of a advocate for partners and helping our customers find the right partners, use partners in the best way possible to help them achieve their goals. And it just made a lot of sense when ISG came along. It made a lot of sense since I was a very pro ISG at the time I was at UiPath, and helping ISG break into a couple of accounts and be kind of a strategic player in some accounts. I thought, let's take a look at what it would be like joining the world of ISG, and made the move about a month and a half ago actually, and couldn't be happier.
And I think there's loads that we can dig into there. I mean, you're now kind of into your third company focused on automation, let's say. And I guess what's been similar? What's changed since you started out? What are the key differences that you've really noticed over the last 6 years? I guess from both the client side and as well as the companies that you've worked in. How's their mindset changed over the last 6 years also?
Yeah, I think probably some of the biggest changes, if I were to look at how we were approaching things 6 years ago, it was very much taking direction from customers because nobody really knew what to do, right? We had ideas, we had thoughts, we had a couple of lessons learned that we could base our decisions off of, but it was still a science experiment. 6 years ago, nobody really had all the answers. And if somebody did say they had all the answers, they just didn't know what they didn't know, and there was gaps there. So we were more of order takers at that time. Customers would say, "This is what I want to do. This is what I aspire to do, and this is what we want. Please help us from a licensing perspective or a services perspective." We would just answer the call, and we would find out the hard way that the direction that customers were taking us was the wrong direction. So then it was a period of that kind of transformed into a period of customers would ask for something, or they would have a need for something, and we would negotiate what to do with that. It was more of let's sit down together and figure out what to do, and then we'll reach a decision together. And that had a little bit more success, but it was still very problematic because we were still two parties trying to figure out where to go with this instead of just one. So it worked a little better, but it still had flaws. Today, the time that I spent at UiPath, there has been, at least from my point of view, and the way that I like to look at things is I've been through 6 years of lessons learned. I've seen things work really well. I've seen a lot of things work terribly. And when customers now approach and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z, I typically will tell them what my recommendations are. Here's what should be done, and here's the reasons why, and here's the customers that did that and became successful. If we go down these other paths, here's what customers did and really struggled or failed with. And I'm much more assertive these days. Some of the partners that have really been in the space for a long time are really acting more as advisors, telling customers what they should be doing instead of order taking and just responding to their requests.
Have you seen being a different approach? Have you had to make a different approach when you're working within the software vendor versus, I guess, now working with in a consultancy and an implementer at ISG?
No, I think the approach is still the same. I think it's very much serving as advisors, and my recommendation to customers is trust the partners that you have and the vendors that you have that have that experience when they're saying, and when I'm saying, decision A is a mistake or it's high risk because of these factors, and here's 20 examples of why, and decision B is the right way to go, and here's the 20 reasons why, and the experience we had to validate that. Customers really should trust the partners and the vendors that have that experience, because going down the wrong path can really be painful and can really set the program back, and really cause a company to suffer in ways that they may not yet understand. And I say that because it's one thing where you can take a look at a journey where you may be targeting $10 million in savings as an example, which is a low target, by the way, for a lot of companies. I think 50 million to 100 million and upward is very achievable if you have the right journey, the right partners, the right vendor, the right strategy behind it, and you've got all the pieces put together in the right way, which advisors can help you with to achieve much higher value numbers. So when you set a goal of, let's say, 10 million, which is pretty average for customers that are 2 to 3 years into their journey, and they don't take the advice of the folks that have the experience across a much broader scope of projects and journeys, they put that $10 million in jeopardy. Not only does that cause a problem with their journey in terms of value over that year, but the exponential growth you get from a proper scaling program where it's 10 million year one, 25 million year two, 60 million to 100 million year three, you're now delaying that benefit for 1 to 2 years, if not longer, because you're not going to, because of the inability to get to those goals, you're not going to get leadership support. You're not going to get the funding you need. You're not going to get support from the business if they've had a bad experience. And now your growth, instead of getting to $100 million in 3 to 5 years, you're now struggling to get to that first $10 million in the first 2 to 3 years. And it can really have a negative impact on the company's potential gain from this that they're missing out on if they don't follow that advice.
There are some massive numbers in there, and I think I referenced this right at the very beginning of the conversation around scale. Now, I know you have a reasonably unique out view on this. It's certainly something that really inspired me when in our early conversations around how you inspire scale and scale thinking in organizations. So let's talk about scale now. I don't know if it's 2 or 3, but have you got any golden rules to scale? And can you talk us through kind of what that approach may be?
Yeah, you can't just rely on finding processes to scale, and that's a common mistake that I'm seeing the vendors make. I've seen partners make that mistake, and customers are making that mistake. It's pretty much it's still one of those visionary concepts that's just not fully matured yet. And what I'm seeing is that in order to scale a program, you have to scale three different aspects of the program, in addition to finding the processes to automate to reach that scale. And those three components are the COE. So you have to have that governance foundation, you have to have the infrastructure foundation, you have to have all of those foundational elements in your program to support scale. Because as you grow and grow, you're going to have, if your support's not sorted out and your production maintenance isn't sorted out or your licensing isn't sorted out, it causes cost challenges, timing challenges, reliability challenges. All of those things can happen as you start to push the scale aspect of it. So you have to have a solid COE, a solid base, a solid infrastructure, and that's really key. The second component is, and this might be the most important one, and it's with some customers, it's either missing or it can be dysfunctional, or it's there and they're actually achieving scale. Is executive leadership support. So you have to have buy-in from leadership, not just from a funding perspective, but from a culture change perspective. So you need leadership to see the benefits of this, understand the value of it, and really get behind it as a key initiative within the organization. And that involves a couple of things. The funding to support the infrastructure and the COE and the licensing and all the components and the technology to support your program, but also for the partners that have to come in and do a lot of the advisory work to assist you to get there and do a lot of the heavy lifting, implementation work and enablement, et cetera. So all of that needs to be there from executive leadership, as well as the cultural shift that has to happen. So leadership needs to be pushing automation as a key business enabler for every employee to be involved in. Either recognize an opportunity to automate a process or learn how to do automation yourselves by becoming a citizen developer. That needs to come from leadership. So that cultural change, the financial backing, the support that comes with it is a key aspect to scale that has to happen at the executive leadership level. That's the second component. The third component is business leadership. If you're not going to get buy-in from the business, you're not going to find the processes. So you have to go in, and the biggest mistake that's happening there is a lot of folks will build the COE and they'll build automation, they'll automate a couple dozen processes, and then they'll showcase, hey, look what we did. Bring your ideas and we'll automate them. And it's a very reactive type program. And the business is busy doing their jobs. They're busy running the business, taking care of the processes. They're managing their staff. They don't have time to sit down and think about automation and solution their problems through the lens of automation and do it well. It's not in their wheelhouse, and they just simply don't have time for it. So what you have to do for the business is you have to go in and solution for them. You have to be able to identify their key challenges, their potential opportunities that they have, whether it's increasing business or closing revenue gaps or improving sales order times, whatever that it is that will help that business perform better. You have to go in and recognize those opportunities and solution for them with automation and present back to say, we see you have these challenges. We have a solution. It's called automation, plus a number of other things that we can throw in to make it a holistic solution. And here's the benefit you get out of it in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever that plan is, to say, here's the benefit you get from it. That's what gets the business to buy into this. So you have to have that buy-in from the business, the support from the executive leadership to make this happen, and a COE that can operate at that scale level once these processes and the business buy-in starts to come in. So those three components working together and scaling together is absolutely required to make a program successful. If you only focus on one of those at a time, you're only going to have 1/3 of the puzzle, and the other two pieces will be challenges and roadblocks that will cause delays, cause issues, and I have never seen a program scale successfully without all three in place.
Well, I think I can definitely see the value there. Certainly thinking about the programs I've been involved in with myself, I like the idea of selling into the business the value that they can create. I think historically, we've generally seen most business cases being built with FTE savings. Is that a difficult thing? Is that a mindset thing? Is it difficult to get away from pure FTE savings when we think about value? And I know you mentioned things like revenue, you mentioned a quicker sales to order, there's those type of benefits. Do you have to do a different type of assessment in order to figure out what those type of benefits are? How do you get away from just purely trying to concentrate on FTE out? I guess is probably the question that's most permanent to me at the moment.
Yeah, what typically drives the FTE savings or the hourly savings discussion is when someone in the business, whether it's HR, IT, the call center, whoever, when they say, "Hey, I've got a process, I want you to automate it," and it's a simple process, and it doesn't really add a lot of value in terms of the other benefits that you can get out of automation, like employee retention, customer satisfaction, revenue recognition, reducing risk of audit and compliance and regulatory requirements. All of those other benefits are really hard to measure. So when somebody says, "Hey, I've got an idea for a process. I need a robot to run a report, a daily report, and upload something to a SharePoint site," that's really hard to measure those kind of things. So what the COE is forced to do is say, well, okay, what we can measure, because all we know about this process is the time saved. So they capture that this process will save 5 hours a week, X number of hours per year, and its value is, some dollar sign X. And that has a really limiting factor because it doesn't move the needle on either side. Business leadership is not going to recognize that as a value add to their business. The COE is not going to recognize that as a successful part of their program because it probably cost them more to develop it than what it was really worth. But they're reacting to the business, so they do it. It's not bad that they're doing that, but what the change that needs to happen there is those type of automations need to shift more towards a citizen developer type solution, which can happen down the road. When you're looking at solutioning for the business, you tend to get away from the FTE savings because as you solution for the business, you're identifying their key challenges, the benefits that move the needle for them. And an example of that might be in your regulatory and compliance audit teams. They may have a amount of work that they do where they're actually doing samples of transactions to audit the accuracy or completeness of data, whether it's orders or transactions or whatever the case may be. And what they have to do in a lot of cases, there can be millions of transactions, sometimes millions, per week or per day, depending on if it's a bank or a store or whatever. So what they have to do is usually they sample a number of those transactions, and they'll take 5% of that information. They'll do the audits and check the work and everything there. So what happens there is if you automate some of that, or if you have some type of automation assistant to help them with those audits, they can not only save the time of doing that work manually, but now you can go in and propose that we can have humans visually inspect a handful of those automations. We can have robots inspect all of the rest. So now instead of sampling a portion of the transactions, you can now have robots sample 100% of the transactions. And the value behind that is not just hours saved in this example, it's actually reducing risk. Because if you sample 5% of your transactions, you're exposed on the other 95%. You have to make assumptions about that 95%. And what you can do for a business that is worried about that risk, worried about compliance, worried about regulatory consequences of not following compliance in those situations, but simply doesn't have the manpower or the time to manually audit all of those transactions, you can now have robots do the work. And instead of instead of auditing 5% of your transactions, you can now get the full 100% of your transactions. And what the value is to the business behind that is now I've reduced my level of risk. So yes, I've got an hour's benefit savings there. That's great. But the key thing that specific business case might be interested in is how do I get my risk level to go from high to low? And in this case, it's the scenario is more about reducing risk, and the value behind that can make a lot of sense for a business where that's important to them. So when you go in and solution for the business and you solve their key challenges, it's very rare that the only outcome is hours saved. It's usually some other benefit or a combination of other benefits that are much more important to the business beyond just hours saved.
Excellent. And risk has always been a really difficult one to quantify. And risk mitigation has always been a really difficult one to build into business case. I know when I've seen it, because it's always about likelihood and severity. But a great example there of how, if that's what really matters to the business, and you can call that out, I think it's a really interesting way of being able to approach the business in different ways to showcase and show off the full value that automation can bring. Because certainly ISG research has shown that the most successful COEs are those that do not just concentrate on FTE out, those that think holistically about the value that automation can bring and concentrate on that, not on
Yeah.
pure cost savings. So we've seen it in the research. So I think what you're saying absolutely backs that up, which is great. So
If I
think
could elaborate on that just a bit more, actually, one more comment I'd like to add to that is one of the things that the COEs tend to struggle with is how to identify and measure and put a value on those different aspects of the benefits of an automation. So it's really hard for somebody who's sitting in a COE to say this automation is going to reduce risk levels from red to yellow or red to green, because it's not in their wheelhouse. It's not what they're accustomed to doing. But the business unit who has to deal with that risk every day, they have a way to measure that. And what the COE needs to do is partner with the business to get them to help measure the risk, to say, let's identify what the risk level is today. And if we can achieve a certain amount of automation or a certain amount of benefit, have the business remeasure it and have them calculate what the risk levels are at the end of it, because they're good at doing that. They understand risk. They know how to measure it. They know what it means to them. They know how to look for it, understand it, et cetera. So the COE just needs to kind of coach the business and really learn from the business on how to manage those things and let the business take ownership of the value and the benefits. And the COE just provides the means and the technology and the partners to get there. So the one thing that I'm seeing a lot of COEs struggle with is when they try to take ownership of the value of automation, when it's beyond just the hours saved.
Really interesting thought there. Yes, I can absolutely see that being both a challenge to a COE in trying to quantify a benefit, which is very difficult to actually calculate. Risk being an example, but I'm sure there are many more things like employee happiness, reduction or improvement in retention. Very difficult to always quantify as a COE, but absolutely benefits that you should be looking to garner through the role of automation. So I think there was kind of 3 key points I took there. Let the business worry about ROI, certainly those that are beyond just pure FTE savings. Don't just build and expect the business to show up. There does need to be a lot of toing and froing and a collaboration of sorts. And then obviously truly sell that big overall value to both leadership, to the board, and also to the people. So it's, if you don't get all 3, then don't expect to be hearing some of those numbers that you were talking about, which is 8 figures and 9-figure benefit cases over 2, 3, 4 years. And they're the type of numbers that I think were always hyped originally, and certainly with your involvement, clients are now starting to realize, which is fantastic. So I think if anyone's really interested in today's episode, best way to get in contact with you, Dan, would be either reach out on LinkedIn for anyone who needs to find Dan. Obviously, your link will be in the show notes, so they'll be able to find that nice and easy. I don't know if there's any other way to reach out, Dan, but I'm sure based on today's conversation, there'll be a lot of people with a lot of questions. So is LinkedIn okay?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So I think with that, we'll have to give today's episode, draw it to a close. But your insights, as always, have been fantastic. I'm sure the audience is going to absolutely love this. I know I will love listening back to this once the episode is out and live. And if anyone does have any questions for Dan, myself, then please feel free to reach out. And so thank you for listening. Dan, thank you for joining us this week. And we'll be back in a few weeks with another episode.
Thank you, Wayne, for having me on. It's been a pleasure.